Diffusion of responsibility. This is a phenomenon where an individual's sense of personal obligation to act decreases as the number of other people present increases. When many people are witnessing an event, each person feels less directly responsible because the perceived burden of action is divided across the group. Pioneering work by psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latnane in the late 1960s demonstrated this principle in compelling laboratory settings. In their 1968 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, participants believed they were discussing personal problems with others over an intercom system. Crucially, only one real participant was involved in each trial. The others were pre-recorded voices. During the discussion, one of the other participants, a Confederate, faked a severe seizure, crying out for help and appearing to choke. Darley and Latnane found that when participants believed they were the only witness, 85% immediately sought help. However, when they believed there was one other person present, the rate dropped to 62%, and when they thought there were 4 other people, only 31% reported the seizure. This dramatic decrease in intervention clearly illustrated how the presence of others diffused the perceived personal responsibility to act. You might see this play out in a busy public park where someone trips and falls, and many people see it, but no single person immediately rushes to help, assuming someone else will. The simple fact that others are there subtly shifts the weight of responsibility off your shoulders, creating a psychological barrier to individual action, not out of malice, but from a shared unspoken assumption that someone else is better positioned or more obligated to step in. Bystander effect. This is the broader observation that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. It's often linked to the tragic 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City, which became a foundational story for the concept. The widely reported account, notably in a New York Times article, claimed 38 witnesses heard her screams over a prolonged attack but did nothing, not even calling the police. This horrific story was taught for decades as irrefutable proof of urban apathy and the bystander effect in action, shaping public perception of human behavior in emergencies. But here's the crucial caveat. The standard telling was substantially inaccurate. Archival research and interviews conducted decades later, particularly by scholars like Joseph DeMay Jr. and later by historian Kevin Cook in his 2014 book Kitty Genovese, The Murder, The Bystanders, The Crime That Changed America, revealed that the 38 witnesses' account was largely a fabrication. Far fewer people actually witnessed the attack directly. Many heard only fragments of sound, and some who did called the police or attempted to intervene, sometimes at personal risk. Recent studies, analyzing hundreds of real-world public conflicts captured by CCTV cameras across the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Denmark, paint a much more optimistic picture. Researchers led by Richard Philpott in a 2019 study published in American Psychologist found that in 90% of these 219 incidents, at least one person intervened to help. Often, multiple bystanders stepped in, showing collective action rather than inaction. The actual behavior of crowds in emergencies is far more cooperative and pro-social than the famous Kitty Genovese story suggested, challenging a long-held narrative about human indifference. Pluralistic ignorance. This occurs when individuals privately reject a group norm or belief, but incorrectly assume that most other people accept it, leading them to conform publicly. Everyone is privately doubting, but assuming from everyone else's inaction or outward conformity that they are the only one with reservations. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman uses an example where everyone in a meeting silently disagrees with a proposed strategy. But no one speaks up because they assume everyone else agrees, creating a false consensus where no one actually supports the idea. This phenomenon creates a self-reinforcing loop because everyone incorrectly infers that others accept the norm, they themselves act in accordance with it, thereby perpetuating the norm and strengthening the illusion for others. A classic study in 1993 by Deborah Prentice and Dale Miller, published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, looked at Princeton University students' attitudes towards alcohol consumption. They found that while most students privately felt uncomfortable with the campus's heavy drinking culture and wished it were less prevalent, they incorrectly believed their peers were much more comfortable with it and even desired more drinking. This misperception, this pluralistic ignorance, made students more likely to conform to drinking norms they didn't actually support, simply because they thought everyone else did, fearing social ostracism or appearing out of touch if they expressed their true feelings. It's a quiet, self-reinforcing trap where everyone is waiting for someone else to break ranks, but no one does, because everyone believes they are the exception. Deindividuation. This is the psychological state where individuals in a group setting lose their sense of personal identity and responsibility, often leading to uninhibited or even antisocial behavior they wouldn't engage in alone. Anonymity, immersion in a large crowd, or wearing uniforms can contribute to this state, diminishing self-awareness and weakening internal restraints. The classic example often cited is Philip Zimbardo's 1971 Stanford prison experiment, where student participants assigned roles as guards or prisoners quickly adopted extreme behaviors. However, that study's methodology and ethics have faced significant criticism and re-evaluation over the years, leading many researchers to question its direct applicability and generalizability. A clearer illustration can be found in more controlled, less ethically fraught studies. For instance, a 1976 Halloween study by Ed Diener, Scott Beeman, Stephen Fraser, and Roger Andres, published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, observed children's behavior while trick-or-treating. Researchers set up bowls of candy and told children they could only take one piece. Crucially, some children were anonymous, wearing masks and not asked their names, while others were identifiable. Some were in groups, others alone. The findings revealed that children who were anonymous and in groups were significantly more likely to take extra candy than those who were identifiable or alone. The mask and the presence of others provided a cloak of anonymity, reducing their individual accountability. You see this effect play out in online forums and social media, where anonymity allows people to post aggressive, hateful, or disinhibited comments they'd never say face-to-face. The group becomes a cloak, loosening the link between your personal standards and your actions, making it easier to engage in behaviors that would otherwise be constrained by individual morality and fear of consequence. Social loafing. This is the tendency for individuals to exert less effort when working in a group than when working alone. The larger the group, the more individual effort tends to decline, primarily because individual contributions become less identifiable, measurable, and perceived as less essential to the group's overall success. The earliest documented observation of this phenomenon is known as the Ringelmann effect, stemming from research conducted by French agricultural engineer Max Ringelmann in 1913. His experiments involved asking individuals and groups of varying sizes to pull on a rope. He consistently found that the collective effort exerted by a group was less than the sum of the efforts of the individuals working alone, 9 times the individual effort. This demonstrated that as group size increased, individual productivity decreased. Later, in a 1979 study by Bibb Latané, Kipling Williams, and Stephen Harkins, published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, participants were asked to clap and shout as loudly as possible when they believed they were performing as part of a group, e.g., with 2 or 6 other people. The sound intensity produced by each individual decreased by 29% and 49% respectively, compared to when they thought they were performing alone. This phenomenon, often attributed to a diffusion of responsibility and a reduced sense of accountability, is prevalent in many contexts. Think of a group project at work. Some team members might quietly pull back, knowing their individual slack won't be easily noticed amid the collective effort, trusting others to pick up the burden. It's a very human tendency to relax when your contribution feels invisible or when you perceive others will compensate for your reduced effort, leading to a suboptimal collective outcome. Groupthink. This is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Cohesion becomes so important that it suppresses independent thought, critical evaluation, and dissent, prioritizing group unity over objective analysis. Psychologist Irving Janis coined the term in 1972 in his book Victims of Groupthink, using historical events like the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion by the U.S. government as a prime example. He argued that President Kennedy's advisors, a highly cohesive group committed to their leader, prioritized consensus over critical evaluation of the flawed plan to overthrow Fidel Castro, leading to a disastrous outcome. Key symptoms observed included an illusion of invulnerability, collective rationalization, a belief in the inherent morality of the group, and pressure on dissenters to conform. Another often cited example is the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster. Investigations, particularly the Rogers Commission report, revealed that some NASA engineers had raised serious concerns about the O-ring's performance in cold temperatures prior to launch. However, these warnings were reportedly downplayed or ignored by management in the push to maintain the launch schedule and avoid disrupting group harmony and the perception of unwavering confidence. The desire for a unanimous decision, for the sake of group cohesion and avoiding conflict, overrode a rational assessment of engineering risks with catastrophic consequences, including the loss of 7 astronauts. This illustrates how a strong drive for internal agreement can blind even highly intelligent and experienced individuals to crucial dangers, leading to profoundly flawed decisions. Asch conformity. This refers to the findings from a series of classic experiments conducted by Solomon Asch in the 1950s, demonstrating the profound power of social pressure to influence individual judgment, even when that judgment contradicts obvious sensory evidence. In his seminal 1951 study, Asch placed participants in a group with several Confederates, actors, who they believed were also participants. They were then shown a reference line and 3 comparison lines and asked to identify which comparison line matched the reference line in length. On certain critical trials, the Confederates, acting in unison, deliberately gave the wrong answer. Asch found that a significant number of participants, approximately 75% across all trials, would conform to the obviously incorrect majority answer at least once, even when their own eyes told them it was wrong. While only about 37% of responses on critical trials were conforming, this was a stark contrast to the less than 1% error rate when participants made judgments alone. This wasn't typically because they actually believed the wrong answer. Rather, it was public compliance driven by a desire to avoid social discomfort, standing out, or being perceived as odd. Subsequent variations of the experiment showed that the presence of even one dissenter significantly reduced conformity. Think of being in a new job and seeing everyone else using an inefficient, outdated process. You know there's a better, faster way, but you might keep quiet and go along with the group, rather than be the sole dissenter who challenges the established, albeit flawed, norm. The pressure to fit in, to not be seen as an outlier, can make us say or do things we know aren't true or optimal. Milgram obedience. This refers to the famous and controversial experiments conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram in the early 1960s at Yale University, designed to investigate the extent to which people would obey an authority figure even when instructed to perform acts that conflicted with their personal conscience. Participants were told to deliver electric shocks of increasing intensity, up to 450 volts, labeled Lerner, an actor, for incorrect answers, ostensibly as part of a study on memory. The standard, dramatic narrative often suggests that a surprisingly high percentage of ordinary people, 65% in one condition, would deliver what they believed to be lethal shocks, simply because an authority figure told them to, implying a chilling capacity for blind obedience. But here's the crucial revision and caveat. Recent archival reanalyses, including those by Gina Perry in her 2012 book Behind the Shock Machine, The Untold Story of the Notorious Milgram Psychology Experiments, and detailed examinations of Milgram's own notes, recordings, and interviews with participants, reveal a more nuanced and complicated picture. Perry and others found that many participants expressed profound doubt about the experiment's reality, suspected the learner was not actually being harmed, and often resisted the experimenter's commands, especially when the prods became more forceful. The amount of outright defiance and the variability between different experimental conditions were far greater than the popular narrative often portrays. Participants were not simply automatons following orders. Their belief in the situation's reality, the perceived legitimacy of the authority, and the coerciveness of the experimenter's prods played a significant role in their compliance or defiance. The experiments were also ethically questionable, causing significant distress to participants. These reevaluations highlight that while authority can be powerful, human agency and moral considerations are far more complex and resistant than the initial, simplified account suggested. Group polarization. This is the phenomenon where, after discussion, the attitudes and opinions of group members become more extreme than their initial individual positions. If a group of like-minded individuals discusses an issue, their collective average position tends to shift further toward the extreme end of the spectrum that they already favored. This isn't just about reaching a consensus. It's about magnifying the initial inclination, pushing the group's collective viewpoint to a more radical stance. For instance, a 1969 study by Serge Moscovici and Marissa Zavaloni, published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, showed that French students who initially held moderately positive views of Americans became even more positive after group discussion, while those who held moderately negative views became even more negative views. This effect is driven by two main mechanisms: persuasive arguments, where individuals are exposed to more arguments supporting their existing position, and social comparison, where individuals adjust their views to align more strongly with the perceived ideal group position. You can observe this readily in online echo chambers and social media bubbles, where individuals already sharing a certain political or social viewpoint engage in discussion exclusively with others who agree. The constant reinforcing arguments, the absence of counter-arguments, and the shared identity push the group's collective belief to a more fervent, less moderate position, often making them less open to opposing viewpoints and more confident in their own extreme stance. This can lead to increased intergroup conflict and a hardening of positions in society. Information cascade. This occurs when individuals make decisions sequentially, observing the choices of those before them, and rationally choosing to follow the observed behavior even if it contradicts their own private information. Essentially, people discard what they know in favor of what they see others doing, assuming that prior decision makers had better information or that there is safety in numbers. This can lead to a stampede effect, where a large number of people end up doing the same thing, based on very little initial independent information. Imagine a new restaurant opens at a quiet part of town. A few people walk in. Then others walking by see those first few, assume they know something positive about the place, it's good or popular, and decide to enter even if they have no personal reason to think the restaurant is good. Soon, a line forms, attracting even more people who base their decisions solely on the growing crowd. Economist Sushil Bikantani and his colleague Zavhichat V. Banerjee and Ivo Welch formally modeled this concept in their influential 1992 paper, A Theory of Fads, Fashion, Custom, and Cultural Change as Informational Cascades, published in the Journal of Political Economy. They showed how a string of individually rational decisions, each based on observing previous choices, can lead to a collective outcome that is not based on sound, widespread evidence. The danger is that the initial decisions, which kick off the cascade, could be arbitrary, based on limited information, or even wrong, yet they can sweep up many others, leading to widespread adoption of a suboptimal choice or belief. Herd behavior. This is essentially information cascades at a larger, often market-wide scale, describing how individuals in a group can act collectively without centralized direction, often driven by emotional contagion or the rational assumption that others have superior information. This phenomenon is a key driver of market bubbles and crashes, social trends, and even political movements. During the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s, for example, many investors poured money into internet companies, not necessarily because they deeply understood the business models or conducted thorough due diligence, but because everyone else seemed to be doing it and prices were rising rapidly, creating an illusion of guaranteed returns. Each individual decision to buy, based on the observed behavior of prior buyers and the upward price momentum, seemed rational at the time given the perceived opportunity for quick profits. However, the collective result was an unsustainable surge in valuations that eventually burst, wiping out trillions in market value. Similarly, the 2000 bubble saw people buying houses at inflated prices, sometimes with risky subprime mortgages, believing that prices would continue to rise indefinitely because everyone else was buying, leading to a market built on a fragile foundation of collective belief rather than intrinsic value or sustainable economics. This collective rush to follow the crowd, often amplified by media and social networks, can override individual critical thinking, leading to widespread adoption of fads or participation in speculative ventures that ultimately prove unsustainable. Moral licensing. This is a cognitive bias where having done a good deed or demonstrated moral behavior in the past makes an individual or group feel entitled to act in a less moral or even immoral way later on. The prior positive action acts as a kind of moral credit that can be spent on a subsequent indulgence, rationalizing a deviation from one's ethical standards. Psychologists Benwetche Manan and Dale Miller demonstrated this in a 2001 study published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. In one experiment, participants who had affirmed their non-prejudiced identity by selecting a black job candidate over a white one in a hypothetical scenario later felt more comfortable expressing potentially prejudiced opinions or making a choice that might be seen as discriminatory against another minority group. The initial moral credential allowed them to relax their guard. You've probably seen this in action in everyday life. Someone who rigorously follows a strict diet and exercises all week might feel completely justified in having a massive, calorie-laden cheat meal or skipping a workout, perceiving it as a reward for their prior good behavior and believing their moral balance is still positive. Or a company that makes a large, publicly lauded charitable donation or achieves a significant sustainability milestone might then feel a subtle internal permission to cut corners on ethical practices elsewhere, such as labor standards or environmental regulations, believing their good deed has balanced the scales. It's a subtle way our minds rationalize less than ideal choices, allowing us to maintain a positive self-image even while engaging in behaviors that contradict our stated values. The mass panic myth. This is the widespread but largely inaccurate belief that in emergencies, crowds will inevitably descend into selfish, irrational chaos, trampling each other in a desperate fight for survival. This dramatic portrayal, often seen in movies, sensationalized news reports, and popular culture, suggests that human nature in a crisis quickly devolves into a brutal every-person-for-themselves mentality. This is a myth. Decades of social science research, particularly by sociologists like John Drury and Stephen Reicher from the University of St. Andrews in Sussex, respectively, have consistently shown that in actual disasters and emergencies, crowds typically behave in highly cooperative, altruistic, and orderly ways. For instance, studies of the 9/11 attacks in the World Trade Center, based on survivor accounts and emergency service reports, revealed countless acts of mutual aid, with strangers helping each other evacuate the towers. Survivors describe people stopping to assist the injured, sharing water and coordinating their efforts rather than pushing and shoving. Similarly, during the 2005 London Underground bombings, survivors reported widespread calmness and collective action, with people helping each other to safety and showing remarkable resilience. Research by Drury and Reicher, summarized in their 2011 book Crowds and Power, argues that rather than panic, a sense of shared social identity often emerges in emergencies, fostering collective resilience and support. While individual fear and confusion are real, the idea of widespread, selfish mass panic simply doesn't hold up to the evidence. Instead, a sense of shared identity and community often emerges, leading to organized and altruistic behavior as people collectively respond to the threat. Subscribe to Impulse, and the next video is waiting for you on screen right now.